A billionaire ordered a temporary wife, but what arrived was a widow with 7 children. He thought he was getting someone quiet, someone he could control. But when that door opened, everything in his world fell apart. Instead of a polished companion, a desperate mother and her 7 scared kids stood on his porch, soaked from the storm, nowhere else to go. He wanted them gone, but the bridge washed out, trapping them in his giant, lonely ranch. And just when he starts to let them in, something dangerous happens on his land. Something that may have been happening long before they arrived. Someone doesn't want this family there, and they're willing to do anything to push them out. Now this billionaire must choose, protect his home, or protect the only people who've made it feel like home again. But when the truth finally comes out, will he be too late to save them? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thunder rolled across the vast Texas sky as Clayton Reeves stood on his sprawling mansion's wraparound porch, his weathered hands gripping the polished wooden railing. The morning's humid air clung to his skin, making his crisp dress shirt uncomfortable. He'd chosen it carefully, wanting to appear professional for what should have been a simple business arrangement. The email from the agency still glowed in his mind. Your temporary wife will arrive this afternoon. It was meant to be straightforward, a business solution to appease his shareholders who'd been pressing him about stability in leadership. They wanted a family man at the helm, not a lone wolf running one of the largest cattle operations in Texas. Clayton checked his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The hands showed 3:15 in the afternoon, and his stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. He'd planned everything meticulously, as he did with all his business dealings. A polite welcome, a tour of the essential areas of the house, and a clear discussion of expectations and boundaries. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The sound of an old engine struggling up his private road made him squint into the distance. Instead of the sleek town car he'd expected, a battered bus wheezed its way toward his house, its faded blue paint peeling in places. Clayton's jaw clenched as the vehicle lurched to a stop, its brakes squealing in protest. The door swung open with a metallic groan, and out stepped a young woman who couldn't have been much past 30. Her dark skin glistened with a light sheen of sweat, and her simple dress, while clean and pressed, spoke of careful budgeting rather than affluence. This wasn't at all what he'd expected, but it was the 7 children who emerged behind her that made his blood run cold. They clustered around her like ducklings, ranging from what looked like early teens down to a tiny girl clutching a worn teddy bear. All of them shared their mother's rich brown complexion and an unmistakable wariness in their eyes as they looked up at his imposing home. Mr. Reeves. The woman's voice carried clearly across the space between them, tinged with uncertainty, but maintaining a dignity that caught him off guard. I'm Olivia Jacobs. There seems to be some mistake. Clayton descended the porch steps, his boots striking the gravel with measured steps. Ma'am, there's definitely been a mistake. He directed his stern gaze toward the bus driver, who was already closing the door. This won't do at all. You'll need to take them back. Olivia stepped forward, her hands clasped together. I'm so sorry for the confusion. When the agency called about a position, I thought... She took a deep breath. Well, clearly there's been a misunderstanding. We'll just... A loud crack of thunder cut through her words, making several of the children jump. The youngest one began to cry, and Olivia immediately scooped her up, whispering soothing words against her hair. The bus driver leaned out his window, his face creased with concern. Sir, there's a big storm rolling in. They're saying the creek's already rising. Bridge might not be passable much longer. As if to confirm his words, fat raindrops began to splatter against the gravel, quickly growing in intensity. The children huddled closer to their mother, and Clayton saw the oldest boy trying to shield his younger siblings with his own body. Clayton ran a hand over his face, feeling the day's stubble beneath his palm. Everything in him wanted to stand firm, to insist they leave immediately. But as another crack of thunder boomed overhead and the rain began to pour in earnest, he couldn't bring himself to turn them away. "Get inside," he said gruffly, gesturing toward the house. "Quick, before you're all soaked." Relief flooded Olivia's face. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Children, come on now. Mind your manners and wipe your feet." The bus driver called out over the increasing roar of the rain. "I'll try to come back once the storm passes, ma'am." Clayton watched as Olivia efficiently guided her children up the porch steps, each one carefully wiping their shoes on the mat before entering. The contrast between their careful movements and his grand entryway was striking. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over their worn clothes, marble floors reflecting their hesitant steps. Inside, they stood in a tight cluster, careful not to touch anything, while water drummed against the windows with increasing fury. Clayton closed the heavy front door, sealing them all inside together. The silence that followed felt thick with uncertainty. "I don't mean to impose," Olivia said softly, still holding her youngest. "Once the storm passes, you can wait it out in the living room." Clayton interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. He gestured toward the spacious room to their right, with its plush sofas and floor-to-ceiling windows that now showed sheets of rain transforming his manicured lawn into a blur of green. The children looked to their mother for permission before moving. She nodded, and they filed in quietly, still staying close together. Clayton noticed how the older ones naturally positioned themselves to watch over the younger ones, a well-practiced routine that spoke of both hardship and love. Olivia remained standing, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. "Mr. Reeves, I want to explain. The agency called about a position for a housekeeper. They said it was urgent, that the pay was good, and that housing would be provided. I never imagined—" She trailed off, her cheeks flushing slightly. Clayton's jaw tightened. He'd specifically requested a professional arrangement, someone who understood the business world, someone without complications. Instead, he had a widow and her 7 children standing in his living room, bringing more life into his house in 5 minutes than it had seen in the past decade. "We'll sort it out after the storm," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Make yourselves comfortable for now. There's no sense in anyone getting caught in weather like this." A particularly bright flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The youngest child buried her face in her mother's neck, while the others jumped but quickly tried to hide their fear. Clayton found himself moving toward the kitchen. I'll make some hot chocolate," he said, surprising himself as much as Olivia. "It'll help warm everyone up." For the first time, a genuine smile crossed Olivia's face, transforming her features from merely pretty to truly beautiful. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Reeves. Thank you." As he busied himself in the kitchen, Clayton could hear the soft murmur of Olivia's voice as she settled her children, her tone warm and reassuring despite their uncertain situation. The sound stirred something in his chest, something he'd thought long buried under years of isolation and careful control. The storm raged outside, but inside his mansion, unexpected guests had brought an equally unexpected warmth. Clayton measured cocoa powder into mugs, trying to remember the last time he'd made hot chocolate for anyone. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice how the usual emptiness of his home seemed less pronounced, filled now with the quiet presence of Olivia and her children. This wasn't what he'd planned. It wasn't what he'd wanted. But as he prepared the hot chocolate, listening to the gentle sounds of life from his living room, Clayton Reeves couldn't quite convince himself that it was entirely unwelcome either. The rain continued to pour, trapping them all together in this moment of unexpected connection, while thunder rolled across the Texas sky like the drums of change. The afternoon stretched into evening as the storm showed no signs of letting up. The grand mansion's lights flickered, ominously, making the youngest children gasp. 7-year-old Marcus clutched his sister's hand while their mother maintained a calm expression, though Clayton could see the worry in her eyes. "The generator will kick in if we lose power," Clayton said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "We should get you all settled before it gets any later." He gestured toward the east wing. "The guest rooms are this way." Olivia gathered her children with quiet efficiency. "Come along now, stay together," she murmured, shepherding them down the hallway. Clayton led them past ornate paintings and antique furniture, painfully aware of the contrast between his wealth and their worn clothing. The guest wing held 4 spacious bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. "You can arrange yourselves however you're comfortable," Clayton said, flipping on lights as they went. "There are extra blankets in the closets." "This is more than generous," Olivia said softly. "We'll try not to be any trouble." Clayton nodded stiffly, unsure how to respond to her gratitude. Before he could retreat, Olivia spoke again. "Would it be all right if I used your kitchen? I noticed some basic ingredients earlier, and I'd like to prepare something for the children." "You don't need to," Clayton started, but Olivia interrupted gently. "Please, it would help us feel less like a burden." Something in her dignified stance made Clayton relent. "The kitchen's yours." An hour later, unexpected aromas drew Clayton from his study. Following his nose to the kitchen, he found Olivia efficiently managing a pot of what smelled like homemade soup. The older children were helping set the table, while the younger ones sat quietly drawing with some paper and pencils they'd found. "I hope you don't mind," Olivia said, stirring the pot. "I found some vegetables and pasta that were about to go bad. I hate to see food waste." Clayton watched as his rarely used kitchen transformed under her careful attention. "There's plenty more in the pantry if you need it," he found himself saying. The children looked up at him with a mixture of wariness and hope. The oldest girl, maybe 13 or 14, spoke up. "Would you like to join us, Mr. Reeves? Mama makes the best soup, even with just simple ingredients." Before Clayton could answer, a loud knocking echoed through the house. He strode to the front door, opening it to find Sheriff Santos dripping on his porch. "Evening, Clayton," the sheriff said, water streaming from his hat. "Thought you should know. The bridge is completely gone. Waters took out the middle section. It'll be at least 3 or 4 days before we can get repairs started. Maybe longer depending on the weather." Clayton's stomach tightened. 3 or 4 days? Maybe more. Nobody's getting in or out of this side of the creek until then. Santos peered past him, catching sight of the lit kitchen. "Smells good in there. Haven't smelled cooking like that coming from your place in years." Clayton shifted uncomfortably. "The agency sent. There was a mix-up. A widow and her children are stranded here until the bridge is fixed." Santos's expression softened with understanding. "Ah, that'd be Mrs. Jacobs and her little ones. Good folks. Her husband was a fine man. Passed 2 years ago in a construction accident." He lowered his voice. "They've had it rough, Clayton, but they're honest people." The information settled heavily in Clayton's chest. He glanced back towards the kitchen, where laughter, actual laughter, was floating out along with the soup's aroma. "They can stay," Clayton said finally, "until the bridge is fixed." Santos nodded approvingly. "Good man. I'll keep you posted on the repairs." He tipped his hat and disappeared back into the rain. When Clayton returned to the kitchen, he found the table set for 8, 7 children and their mother. But there was a 9th place set as well, waiting quietly at the head of the table. "Please join us," Olivia said simply. "There's plenty." The meal passed with surprising ease. The children were unfailingly polite, saying please and thank you, helping their younger siblings and keeping their voices low. Clayton found himself answering questions about his ranch, the cattle, and the horses that roamed his property. As the evening wound down, Olivia began organizing bedtime routines. Clayton retreated to his study, but found himself pausing in the hallway when he heard Olivia's voice from one of the guest rooms. "Time for prayers, children, and tonight we have special thanks to give." "For Mr. Reeves?" a young voice asked. "Yes, for Mr. Reeves's kindness in sheltering us from the storm, and for this beautiful home that's keeping us safe tonight. Let's pray for continued safety, and that we can be good guests while we're here." Clayton stood frozen, listening to the soft chorus of "Amen" that followed. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since before his wife's death, before the betrayals that had led him to shut himself away from the world. Moving quietly past the door, Clayton made his way to his own wing of the house. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the Texas landscape, but inside, his normally silent mansion held the gentle sounds of children being tucked into bed, of quiet good nights, of life itself. He stood at his bedroom window, watching lightning illuminate the rain-soaked world. The bridge was gone, and with it his chance to quickly resolve this unexpected situation. But as he listened to the last quiet movements of Olivia and her children settling in for the night, he couldn't quite convince himself that this was the disaster it had first appeared to be. The storm raged on through the darkness, its winds and rain sealing them all together in this unexpected arrangement, while inside, the warmth of family life crept through the mansion's halls for the first time in years. Dawn broke over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds as the last storm clouds drifted away. The morning air held that special freshness that comes after a big rain, though puddles and mud marked every surface of the sprawling ranch. Olivia Jacobs woke before sunrise, her internal clock still set to the demanding schedule of caring for 7 children. She slipped quietly from her bed, careful not to wake her youngest who had crawled in during the night, scared by the thunder. The mansion's guest wing was silent, except for the soft breathing of her sleeping children. Making her way to the kitchen, Olivia's practiced eyes took in every detail. Though beautiful, the space showed signs of neglect. Not dirt exactly, but the kind of emptiness that comes from disuse. She opened cabinets until she found what she needed: oatmeal, brown sugar, and cinnamon. Simple ingredients, but she knew how to make them special. As she worked, she hummed softly, tidying as she went. The blankets they'd used in the living room were carefully folded and stacked. Dishes from last night's dinner were washed and put away. She wanted to show Clayton Reeves that his reluctant hospitality wouldn't be taken for granted. Clayton stood in the doorway for several minutes before Olivia noticed him. The sight before him stirred memories he'd long buried, of breakfast cooking, of a warm kitchen, of a home that felt lived in. He watched as she moved with quiet efficiency, her movements graceful and purposeful. "Good morning, Mr. Reeves," Olivia said when she finally spotted him. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to make breakfast for everyone. There's coffee ready." Clayton cleared his throat. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." She gestured to a cup she'd already poured for him. "Black, right? I noticed last night at dinner." He took the cup, surprised by her observation. The coffee was perfect, strong and hot, just the way he liked it. "Thank you," he said gruffly. The sound of small feet preceded the arrival of Olivia's children, filing into the kitchen with sleepy faces and tousled hair. The oldest ones helped the younger ones into chairs, maintaining the same quiet politeness they'd shown at dinner. "Mama makes the best oatmeal," one of the middle boys announced proudly. "She makes it taste like cookies." Clayton watched as Olivia served everyone, making sure each bowl had the right amount of brown sugar and cinnamon. The domestic scene felt foreign in his kitchen, yet somehow right. After breakfast, the children pressed their faces against the windows, amazed by the vast ranch spreading out before them. "Can we go outside, Mama?" the youngest girl pleaded. "Please." Olivia looked uncertainly at Clayton, who surprised himself by nodding. "Stay away from the creek. It's still high. And don't bother the cattle." The children's excitement was palpable as they pulled on shoes and jackets. Olivia sent the two oldest in charge of watching their younger siblings, giving firm instructions about staying, together and within sight of the house. As Clayton watched them explore from his office window, his foreman, Pete, arrived with troubling news. "Boss, we've got a problem. That shipment of cattle from the north pasture, numbers aren't adding up. Third time this month something like this has happened." Clayton's jaw tightened. "Show me." Pete laid out several reports, pointing out discrepancies. From the doorway, Olivia cleared her throat softly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. I used to help my husband with his construction company books, if you need another pair of eyes." Clayton hesitated, studying her. Finally, he pulled out his ledgers and handed them over. "These go back 6 months. Olivia sat at a small side table, her attention focused on the numbers. The men returned to their discussion, but after about an hour, she spoke up. "Mr. Reeves, I think you should look at this." She had organized the information methodically, highlighting patterns that weren't immediately obvious. Cattle counts that didn't match between reports, dates that had been altered, small withdrawals that added up to significant amounts over time. "See here." She pointed to a series of entries. "These numbers have been changed after the fact. And these withdrawals, they're just small enough to fly under the radar, but they're regular. Someone's been very careful about this." Clayton studied the evidence, his expression darkening. Someone on his payroll was stealing from him, and they'd been doing it right under his nose. The betrayal stung, bringing back memories of other betrayals he'd rather forget. The day passed in a blur of research and cross-checking. Olivia kept her children occupied, but occasionally brought coffee or sandwiches to the office where Clayton and Pete worked. Her quiet efficiency and sharp mind proved invaluable as they traced the pattern of theft. As evening approached, Olivia called her children in from their outdoor adventures. They came readily, full of stories about what they'd seen, horses in the distance, a family of rabbits, birds they'd never spotted in the city. Their excitement brought life to the mansion's halls, a stark contrast to the heavy thoughts weighing on Clayton's mind. Standing on his back porch, Clayton watched the sun sink towards the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Behind him, through the windows, he could hear Olivia gathering her children for dinner, their voices a gentle reminder of how much had changed in just 24 hours. The vast Texas landscape stretched before him, beautiful but somehow lonely in the fading light. The ranch had been his whole world for so long, and now someone he trusted had betrayed that trust. Yet inside his home, a woman he barely knew had helped him see what had been happening right in front of him all along. Clayton stood there until the last rays of sun disappeared, lost in thought as darkness settled over his land. Through the windows, warm light spilled out onto the porch, carrying with it the sounds of life and family. Sounds his home hadn't known in far too long. The morning sun streamed through Clayton's kitchen windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air. The aroma of fresh coffee drew him from his office, where he'd been up since dawn reviewing the troubling ledgers. Olivia stood at the counter, already dressed for the day in a simple blue dress, her hair neatly tied back. She turned as he entered, offering a steaming mug. "Black, right? I noticed yesterday." Clayton accepted the coffee with a grunt of thanks, secretly impressed she'd picked up on his preference. His first sip confirmed she'd made it exactly how he liked it, strong enough to stand a spoon in. "Mr. Reeves," Olivia began carefully, her hands clasped in front of her. "I hope you'll forgive me for speaking out of turn, but I couldn't sleep last night thinking about those ledgers." Clayton lowered his mug, studying her over its rim. "Go on." "The pattern I noticed. It's not just random mistakes. Someone's been carefully skimming money and adjusting the cattle counts to hide it." She spoke softly but firmly. "They're counting on no one looking too closely at the small discrepancies." Clayton set his mug down, considering her words. The same conclusion had been gnawing at him all night. "You're sure?" "In my husband's business, we caught an employee doing something similar." Olivia's eyes held a mixture of sympathy and determination. "I don't mean to intrude, but I'd hate to see anyone take advantage of your trust." The word trust hit him like a physical blow, but he kept his face neutral. "I appreciate your insight, Mrs. Jacobs. I'll handle it from here." Outside, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the window. Olivia's youngest two were chasing butterflies, while their older siblings helped collect eggs from the chicken coop under the watchful eye of Maria, his housekeeper. "They're good workers," Clayton observed, surprised by their willingness to help with chores. "We believe in earning our keep," Olivia said simply. "Speaking of which, I noticed your vegetable garden could use some attention. If you're willing, the children and I could help tend it while we're here." Before Clayton could respond, his foreman Pete appeared at the kitchen door, his expression troubled. "Boss, need to talk to you about something." Clayton followed Pete outside, where the man shifted uncomfortably. "Town's talking. Jimmy Miller drove past yesterday, saw the bus. Word spreading about your visitors." Heat rose in Clayton's neck. Of course the gossips would have a field day with this situation. A wealthy white rancher taking in a black widow and her 7 children. The rumors would be flying. "I need to make a supply run," Clayton said gruffly. "I'll handle it." The drive into town confirmed Pete's warning. Heads turned as Clayton parked his truck outside the general store. Inside, conversations hushed as he entered, then resumed in whispers. Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, watched him with narrowed eyes as she rang up his purchases. "Heard you've got quite a full house these days," she said, her tone suggesting she was fishing for details. "Bridge is out," Clayton replied shortly. "They'll be moving on once it's fixed." The whispers followed him down the street as he loaded supplies into his truck. He caught fragments of conversations. Living in sin. Those poor children. What would his mother say? Anger simmered in his chest. These people had known him his whole life. Did they really think he'd do anything improper? But he knew how small towns worked. They'd believe whatever made the juiciest gossip. Returning to the ranch, he found Olivia and the children in the vegetable garden. They'd already cleared away weeds and dead plants, creating neat rows ready for new seedlings. The older children worked steadily, while the younger ones helped as best they could, following their mother's gentle instructions. Olivia had tied a scarf around her head to keep off the sun, and dirt smudged her cheeks. Yet she moved with purpose and dignity, teaching her children as they worked. "See how deep to plant the seeds? That's right, just like that. Good job, baby." Clayton watched them from his porch, struck by their industry. No complaints, no arguing, just quiet determination to be useful. He'd expected them to treat his home like a free hotel, but instead they seemed intent on improving whatever they touched. That evening, Maria outdid herself preparing dinner, clearly happy to have appreciative guests to cook for. The dining room, usually silent except for the clink of Clayton's solitary fork, rang with the quiet chatter of children remembering to mind their manners. "Please pass the potatoes. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Reeves. May I have more water, please?" Clayton found himself watching Olivia manage her brood with gentle efficiency. A quiet word here, a subtle gesture there, keeping 7 children in line without raising her voice once. It stirred memories of his own mother's quiet authority, long ago. After dinner, Olivia gathered her children in the guest wing's sitting room. Clayton passed by, intending to return to his office, but the sound of her voice made him pause in the hallway. "The Lord is my shepherd." Olivia read clearly, her children nestled around her with their well-worn Bible. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Clayton found himself leaning against the wall, letting the familiar words wash over him. How long had it been since anyone had read scripture in his home? The peace in Olivia's voice, the children's attentive silence, created an atmosphere that seemed to soften the sharp edges of his day. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." Olivia continued, "And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." "Amen," the children chorused softly. Clayton remained in the shadows of the hallway, listening as Olivia answered her children's questions about the psalm's meaning. Her explanations were simple but profound, filled with a quiet faith that seemed to sustain her through all difficulties. The sound of small feet heading to bed finally broke his reverie. Clayton straightened, surprised to find some of the tension had left his shoulders. He moved quietly away before anyone could spot him, but the echo of Olivia's gentle voice reading those ancient words of comfort followed him down the hall. The morning sun cast long shadows across Clayton's desk when Sheriff Santos's message arrived. The deputy handed over the sealed note with an apologetic look that made Clayton's stomach sink before he even read it. "Bridge inspection revealed structural damage." Clayton read aloud, his jaw tightening. "Repairs estimated at minimum 1 week, possibly longer." He glanced out his office window where Olivia was hanging laundry on the line, her children helping to pass clothespins. The sight of domestic activity on his property still felt foreign, like watching scenes from someone else's life play out in his yard. Olivia must have sensed his gaze because she looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. Gathering her skirt, she made her way to the house, her expression already apologetic. "Mr. Reeves," she began as she entered his office, "I just heard about the bridge from your ranch hand. I cannot express how sorry I am for this continued imposition." Clayton waved off her apology, though his frustration showed in the tight set of his shoulders. "Not your fault the bridge is damaged. Still, we should earn our keep." Olivia's chin lifted slightly. "I noticed the old bunkhouse while hanging the wash. With your permission, we could clean it up, make it habitable again. That way we'd be out of your main house, at least." Clayton hadn't set foot in the bunkhouse for years, not since switching to day workers instead of live-in hands. The building probably needed more than just cleaning, but Olivia's offer to work rather than accept charity stirred his respect. "Fine," he said gruffly. "Tools are in the shed. Just be careful in there." Olivia gathered her children after breakfast, arming them with brooms, rags, and determination. Clayton watched from his office as they trooped toward the bunkhouse, even the smallest carrying a dustpan with solemn purpose. Throughout the morning, he tried to focus on the ledgers spread across his desk, but his attention kept straying to the activity at the bunkhouse. Windows were thrown open, letting in fresh air for the first time in years. Dust clouds billowed outdoors. The children formed a line, passing out debris and old furniture like a well-organized bucket brigade. Olivia directed operations with quiet efficiency, praising effort and redirecting energy when needed. She had tied a bandana over her hair and rolled up her sleeves, working alongside her children instead of just supervising. Clayton found himself impressed by how she turned what could have been a dreary chore into something approaching an adventure for the younger ones. The ledger problems, however, demanded his attention. Numbers that should have matched didn't. Cattle counts that made no sense. Money flowing in directions it shouldn't. The more he studied the patterns, the more certain he became that someone was systematically stealing from him. The question was who, and how long it had been going on. Around noon, a soft knock interrupted his concentration. Olivia stood in the doorway with a tray holding a sandwich and fresh lemonade. "You missed lunch," she said simply. "May I come in?" Clayton nodded, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. As he ate, Olivia glanced at the ledgers spread across his desk. "I hope you don't mind me asking," she said carefully, "but have you noticed how the discrepancies seem to cluster around certain dates?" Clayton paused mid-bite. "What do you mean?" Olivia pointed to several entries. "Here and here. The numbers start shifting right after supply deliveries, and these cattle counts, they drop most dramatically during the new moon, when nights are darkest." Clayton stared at the patterns she identified, seeing them clearly now that she'd pointed them out. Someone was using the cover of darkness and the distraction of regular deliveries to move cattle off his land. The systematic nature of it suggested inside knowledge. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This helps." Olivia smiled slightly. "Numbers have always made sense to me. My husband used to say I should have been an accountant instead of a homemaker." The mention of her late husband brought a softness to her eyes that made Clayton look away, uncomfortable with the intimacy of shared grief. By evening, the bunkhouse transformation was remarkable. Windows gleamed, floors shone, and fresh-cut wildflowers brightened the main room. The children had even found old quilts in a trunk and hung them on the walls, adding warmth to the spare space. "It's not fancy," Olivia said as she stirred a pot of stew in the kitchen later. "But it's clean and solid. We can move in tomorrow, stop imposing on your house." Clayton watched her children set the table, their movements now familiar in his kitchen. The youngest hummed as she carefully placed spoons, while the older ones discussed their day's accomplishments. The scene tugged at something in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. But before he could examine that feeling too closely, Pete burst through the door, face flushed with alarm. "Boss! The north paddock gate. Someone left it wide open. If we hadn't caught it, half the herd could have scattered." The warmth in Clayton's chest turned to ice. That gate had heavy chains and multiple locks. Someone had deliberately opened it, risking thousands of dollars worth of cattle. The thefts were escalating into sabotage. Later that night, unable to sleep, Clayton found himself standing in the hallway of the guest wing. The door to the children's room stood slightly ajar, and he could hear their soft breathing. Olivia had fallen asleep in a chair by the youngest's bed, her hand resting protectively on the child's back. Looking at them, innocent, vulnerable, unknowingly caught in what was becoming a dangerous situation, Clayton felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Someone was trying to destroy him, and now these 7 children and their mother might be in harm's way simply because they had sought shelter under his roof. The moonlight cast shadows through the window, and Clayton's hands clenched at his sides. He hadn't invited this battle, but he would fight it, now not just for himself, but for them too. Dawn crept over the Texas ranch with threads of pink and gold, but Clayton Reeves found no beauty in the morning. His boots crunched across frost-tipped grass as he made his way to the north paddock, jaw set in a hard line. The gate hung open like a broken promise, its heavy chain coiled in the dirt. Clayton knelt to examine the ground, his experienced eyes finding what he dreaded: fresh boot prints pressed deep into the mud. They led away from the gate toward the equipment shed, their pattern familiar. Years of working alongside his men had taught him to recognize their habits, even down to the way they walked. These tracks held a purpose that made his stomach twist. "Morning, boss," called a voice, and Clayton straightened to see Brent Walker approaching. The foreman's usual confident stride seemed forced, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Quite a mess with that gate yesterday." "Sure was," Clayton replied evenly, studying the man he'd trusted for years. "Any thoughts on how it happened?" Brent shrugged, scuffing his boot in the dirt, right next to the suspicious tracks. "Could have been kids from town, maybe. Or that new hand Mike seems careless sometimes." Clayton noted how quickly Brent deflected blame. "Maybe. Though those locks are pretty complicated for pranking teenagers." "Well," Brent's tone sharpened slightly. "Lots of strange things happening lately. Speaking of which, those people staying in your house. Quite generous of you." The way Brent emphasized "those people" made Clayton's shoulders tense. "They're temporary guests. Mrs. Jacobs has been helping review the books." "Has she now?" Brent's laugh held an edge. "Didn't realize we needed outside help with our accounts. Thought that was my job." "Fresh eyes can be useful," Clayton said mildly, watching Brent's reaction. The foreman's face tightened for just a moment before smoothing into careful neutrality. "Whatever you say, boss. Your ranch, your choice who you let into it." As Brent walked away, Clayton felt certain his suspicions were justified. The resentment in his foreman's voice spoke volumes. Back at the main house, the scene was markedly different. Delicious. Smells wafted from the kitchen, where Olivia had somehow managed to create a feast from simple ingredients. Her children moved with purpose, the older ones sweeping the wide front porch, while the younger ones collected fallen leaves from the outdoor seating areas. "Good morning, Mr. Reeves," Olivia greeted him, setting a plate of golden biscuits on the table. "I hope you don't mind. The children wanted to help around the ranch. They're used to having chores." Clayton watched through the window as her oldest son carefully straightened the rocking chairs. "They do good work. They understand the value of earning their keep," Olivia said quietly. "Even temporary shelter deserves respect and gratitude." Something in her dignity made Clayton uncomfortable with her children working like servants. "They don't have to—" "Please," Olivia interrupted gently. "Let them contribute. It helps them feel less—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Less like charity cases." Clayton nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. He sat down to eat, surprised by how normal it felt having them there, how the house seemed less empty. That afternoon, Olivia knocked on his office door, several ledgers in her arms. "Mr. Reeves, I found something else." She spread the books on his desk, pointing to columns of numbers. "These feed delivery receipts. They show regular orders for 200 head of cattle, but your actual herd count is only 175. Someone's been ordering extra feed and—" She hesitated. "And pocketing the difference." Clayton finished grimly. "Probably selling the excess feed to other ranchers under the table." He ran a hand through his hair, feeling foolish for not catching it sooner. "This has been going on for months, hasn't it?" Olivia nodded. "At least 6 months, maybe longer. The pattern is very consistent." Clayton studied the evidence, anger building in his chest. Someone he trusted had been systematically stealing from him, and he'd been too busy maintaining his isolation to notice. As evening approached, Clayton found himself walking Olivia and her children back to the bunkhouse. The kids chattered excitedly about their day, especially their encounters with the ranch animals. The youngest girl, barely 6 years old, described in detail how a friendly mare had let her pet its nose. "She's so soft, Mama, and she likes apples. Mr. Pete showed me how to feed her proper, with my hand flat so she don't bite by accident." Olivia smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Did you remember to thank Mr. Pete?" Yes, ma'am, and I told the horse thank you too. Clayton felt something shift in his chest, watching them. The children's natural joy with the animals reminded him of simpler times before grief and betrayal had hardened him. The bunkhouse looked welcoming in the sunset light, its windows gleaming from their cleaning the day before. The children ran ahead, eager to show him the improvements they'd made inside. Handmade drawings now decorated the walls, and wild flowers brightened the wooden tables. Thank you for walking us back, Olivia said softly as the children settled in for the evening. And thank you for letting us stay, even though we're not what you expected. Clayton wanted to say something meaningful, but words failed him. He simply nodded and turned toward the main house. Later that night, sleep eluded him. He lay in his too large bed, thinking about Olivia's careful analysis of his books. She'd seen through problems he'd ignored for far too long, problems that might have eventually ruined him. Her presence, unexpected and unwanted at first, had forced him to face truths he'd been avoiding. The moon cast silver light through his window, and Clayton stared at the ceiling, wondering how he'd missed so much for so long. Maybe he'd been so focused on protecting himself from emotional attachments that he'd failed to protect his legacy, his ranch, his livelihood. The thought was humbling and troubling. The Texas sun rose bright and unforgiving the next morning, promising another scorching day. Clayton adjusted his tie in the mirror, uncomfortably aware of the shareholder luncheon awaiting him in town. These meetings always tested his patience, but today felt especially daunting. Olivia stood in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel in her hands. Please don't worry about the ranch, Mr. Reeves. The children and I will keep watch while you're gone. Clayton hesitated, his fingers still on his tie. You sure about that? With everything that's been happening? We'll be fine, she assured him, her voice steady and calm. The children know to stay close to the house, and I'll keep my eyes open. He nodded, studying her determined expression. My cell phone number is on the fridge. Call if anything seems off. Anything at all. Olivia gathered her children in the living room before Clayton left. Now remember, she said firmly, Mr. Reeves is trusting us to look after his property. I expect you all to be on your best behavior. Yes, Mama, they chorused, 7 pairs of eyes serious and attentive. The drive into town gave Clayton too much time to think. Recent events had shaken his carefully ordered world, and he wasn't sure how he felt about that. The stolen cattle, the suspicious activities, and now this widow and her children who'd somehow worked their way past his defenses. The Golden Rose restaurant was already buzzing with activity when Clayton arrived. The monthly shareholder luncheon was a tradition he usually dreaded, but today felt different. He was armed with Olivia's discoveries about the books, though he wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. Clayton! Marcus Wheeler, one of his oldest shareholders, waved him over. We were just discussing your unusual house guests. The table fell quiet as Clayton took his seat. He could feel the judgment in their stares, the barely concealed disapproval. A widow, with 7 children, Sarah Whitman said, her voice dripping with false concern. Really, Clayton, what were you thinking? It's not like you to be so impulsive. The bridge was out, Clayton replied evenly, unfolding his napkin. Would you have preferred I leave them in the storm? Of course not. Marcus cut in smoothly. But surely there were other options. The church shelter in Mason City, perhaps? 20 miles away, through floodwaters. Clayton's voice had an edge to it now. That would have been mighty Christian of me. Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. It's just, well, people are talking, Clayton. A black widow and her whole tribe of children staying at your ranch. It doesn't look proper. Something snapped inside Clayton. He set down his water glass with deliberate care. Mrs. Whitman? he said, his tone dangerously quiet. "I don't much care what looks proper to small-minded folks. That woman has shown more integrity in 5 days than I've seen in this town in 5 years." The table fell silent, shocked by his uncharacteristic display of emotion. "But Clayton," Marcus started. "No." Clayton cut him off. "Mrs. Jacobs and her children are my guests. They're honest, hard-working people who've helped me spot some serious problems with the ranch operations. Problems that affect your investments, by the way. So unless you've got business matters to discuss, I suggest we move on." The luncheon proceeded in uncomfortable starts and stops after that. Clayton presented the quarterly reports, carefully omitting his suspicions about the theft for now. He needed more proof before making accusations. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Olivia kept the children busy with indoor games and reading. She checked the windows regularly, something in her gut telling her to stay alert. It was mid-afternoon when she spotted the truck. It was an old blue pickup, moving slowly along the west fence line where it shouldn't be. Olivia's heart jumped into her throat. "Children," she called out calmly, "inside the house, please, right now." They responded to the urgency in her voice, quickly gathering in the living room. Olivia locked the doors and called Clayton's cell phone, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Clayton was already on his way home when his phone rang. Hearing the tension in Olivia's voice, he pressed the accelerator harder. "Blue pickup," he confirmed. "Stay inside. I'm 5 minutes away." He reached for the rifle he kept behind his truck seat, checking that it was loaded. As he roared up the ranch road, he caught sight of the truck Olivia had described. 2 men were loading something into the back. Feed bags, by the look of it. Clayton's truck skidded to a stop, sending gravel flying. He stepped out, rifle raised. "This is private property, gentlemen." The men froze. One of them, Clayton recognized him as a hand from the neighboring Carson ranch, dropped the feed bag he was holding. Without a word, they scrambled into their truck and peeled out, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Clayton memorized the license plate as they fled, then hurried to check on Olivia and the children. He found them in the living room, the older kids playing cards with the younger ones to keep them calm. "Everyone okay?" he asked, his voice gruff with concern. Olivia nodded. "We're fine. I'm sorry if I overreacted, but something about that truck." "You didn't overreact," Clayton assured her. "Those men were stealing feed. You did exactly right." "I just did what anyone with a conscience would do," she said quietly, smoothing her daughter's hair. "This is your home, your livelihood. It deserves to be protected." Later that evening, as Clayton sat at his desk making notes about the incident, there was a soft knock at his office door. The children stood there, somewhat shy but determined, their oldest brother holding something behind his back. "We made you something, Mr. Reeves," the boy said, presenting a large piece of construction paper covered in colorful drawings. "To say thank you for keeping us safe." Clayton took the card carefully. Each child had contributed. There were drawings of horses, the ranch house, stick figures of all of them together. At the bottom, in careful lettering, "Thank you for protecting us. From the Jacobs family." He stared at the card for a long moment, emotion thick in his throat. "This is—" he cleared his throat. "This is real nice. Thank you." The children beamed at him before Olivia ushered them off to bed. Clayton sat in his office for a long time after they left, looking at their artwork and wondering how these unexpected guests had managed to wake something in his heart he'd thought was long dead. The early morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Olivia moved confidently between counters and stove. The aroma of fresh coffee, crispy bacon, and fluffy pancakes filled the air. She had woken up extra early, determined to show her appreciation for Clayton's protection the day before. "Mama, can I help set the table?" Grace asked, already gathering plates from the cupboard. "Yes, sweetheart. Make sure to use the nice placemats we found in the drawer," Olivia replied, flipping another golden pancake. The kitchen bustled with activity as her children helped prepare for breakfast. The younger ones carried napkins and silverware, while the older ones arranged everything just so. Their excited chatter echoed through the usually quiet house. Clayton appeared in the doorway, drawn by the comforting sounds and smells. He paused, taking in the scene before him. The dining room he'd avoided for so long had transformed. Sunlight danced across the polished wood table, now set with care and attention. "Good morning, Mr. Reeves," Olivia said warmly. "We wanted to thank you properly for yesterday. I hope you'll join us for breakfast." Clayton nodded, somewhat stiffly. "Smells good," he managed, settling into his chair at the head of the table. The children took their seats, their eyes bright with anticipation. Olivia served generous portions of pancakes, crispy bacon, and scrambled eggs. Fresh fruit brightened each plate with spots of color. "Matthew, would you pass Mr. Reeves the syrup?" Olivia asked her middle son, who eagerly complied. Clayton watched in quiet amazement as the family fell into an easy rhythm of passing dishes and helping younger siblings cut their pancakes. The dining room, usually cold and empty, now hummed with life. "These pancakes are real good, Mrs. Jacobs," Clayton said, surprising himself with the compliment. Olivia's smile warmed her eyes. "Thank you. It's an old family recipe." After breakfast, while the children helped clear the table, Olivia followed Clayton to his office. Spread across his desk were delivery receipts and inventory lists from the past 6 months. "I noticed something odd about these feed delivery dates," Olivia said, pointing to several entries. "See here? The quantities don't match what's recorded in the inventory." Clayton leaned closer, their shoulders nearly touching as they examined the papers. "You're right. We're being charged for more than we're receiving." They spent hours comparing documents, making notes, and uncovering more discrepancies. Olivia's methodical approach and attention to detail impressed Clayton, though he kept his thoughts to himself. "The feed supplier might be in on it," Olivia suggested gently. "Or someone's falsifying the receiving documents." Clayton rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Either way, we're getting closer to the truth." Around midday, they took a break to check on the children. Clayton found himself leading them to the chicken coop, showing them how to scatter feed properly. "Not too much at once," he instructed, demonstrating the right amount. "That's it, just like that." The children's faces lit up with pride as they mastered the task. Even the youngest ones participated, giggling as the chickens pecked around their feet. "Now for egg collecting," Clayton said, surprising himself with his patience. He showed them how to reach carefully under the hens and gather eggs in their baskets. Grace proved particularly skilled at the task. "Look, Mr. Reeves, I found 6 eggs." "Good job." He nodded, fighting back a smile at her enthusiasm. They moved on to the barn, where Clayton demonstrated the proper way to sweep the aisle. The children worked together, turning even this simple chore into a game while still doing it well. As evening approached, Olivia prepared dinner in the kitchen while the children set the table again. This time, they set an extra place without being asked. "Mr. Reeves," Grace called from the dining room doorway, "will you eat with us tonight?" Clayton hesitated, but the hopeful look in her eyes made refusal impossible. "Suppose I could," he said gruffly. Once everyone was seated, Grace folded her hands and looked at Clayton. "Would it be okay if I say grace?" Clayton nodded, surprised by the lump in his throat. "Dear Lord," Grace began clearly, "thank you for this food, and for Mr. Reeves letting us stay here. Thank you for keeping us safe yesterday, and for giving us new friends. Amen." The simple prayer touched something deep in Clayton's heart. As they passed dishes around the table, the children shared stories about their day, each eager to tell about their new skills with the chickens and barn chores. "And did you see how fast I swept the barn?" Matthew exclaimed, accidentally knocking over his water glass in his excitement. Instead of anger or harsh words, laughter erupted around the table. Clayton found himself joining in, a rich, genuine laugh that felt foreign but wonderful in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like this. After dinner, the children gathered in the living room to play a board game they'd found. Olivia stood in the doorway watching them, and Clayton found himself standing beside her. In the warm lamplight, the children's faces glowed with happiness as they played. Clayton felt something shift inside him, a softening of the hard edges he'd built up over the years. When he smiled at their antics, really smiled, Olivia caught sight of his expression. She said nothing, but her own smile deepened at seeing this glimpse of the man beneath the stern exterior. The evening continued with the gentle sounds of children's laughter filling the once silent house, and Clayton found himself wishing, just for a moment, that it could always be this way. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Clayton stood in his office, reviewing his shopping list. He'd been putting off the supply run, but with 9 extra people in the house, they needed groceries. His gaze drifted to the window, where Olivia was helping her youngest button up a cardigan. Taking a deep breath, Clayton stepped onto the porch. "Mrs. Jacobs, would you and the children like to come into town with me today? We need supplies." Olivia's hands stilled on the buttons. Her eyes met his, searching. "Are you sure that's wise, Mr. Reeves?" Clayton understood her hesitation. Small Texas towns could be set in their ways. "I'm sure. The children could use the outing, and I could use the help selecting groceries." Olivia gathered her children, straightening collars and smoothing wild curls. "Remember your manners," she reminded them quietly. "Stand tall and be polite, no matter what." They piled into Clayton's large SUV, the children buzzing with excitement about their first trip to town. Clayton watched in the rearview mirror as Olivia helped buckle the younger ones in, her movements gentle but efficient. The 20-minute drive into town was filled with the children's chatter about what they might see. Clayton found himself smiling at their enthusiasm, though he tried to hide it. Main Street was busy with Saturday morning shoppers when they arrived. As soon as they stepped onto the sidewalk, the atmosphere changed. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. People stared openly at Olivia and her children, then at Clayton. "Look at that!" A woman whispered too loudly to her friend. "Clayton Reeves with that woman and all those children." Olivia's back straightened, but her voice remained calm as she guided her children toward the grocery store. "Eyes forward, children. Remember who you are." Inside the store, the whispers followed them. Clayton noticed how Olivia carefully selected the most economical items, teaching her children to compare prices as they helped. "Mama, why is that lady looking at us mean?" 7-year-old Sarah asked. "Some people don't know any better, sweetheart." Olivia answered softly. "We'll pray for them." At the meat counter, an older woman muttered a racial slur under her breath as she passed. Clayton's fists clenched, but before he could speak, he saw how Olivia handled it. She stood taller, her dignity like armor, and continued selecting items while engaging her children in conversation about meal planning. They were nearly finished when Tom Wheeler, a local rancher Clayton had known for years, approached them near the checkout. "Clayton," Tom said, his voice carrying. "Didn't expect to see you playing house. This woman must have quite a hold on you. Always thought you were smarter than to let yourself get took." The store went quiet. Clayton felt rage build in his chest, not just at the insult to himself, but at the implication about Olivia. He stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "Mrs. Jacobs is a guest at my ranch, Tom. She's shown more integrity in a week than most folks around here have in years. You'd do well to watch your mouth." Tom's face reddened. "Since when do you defend—" "Since right now." Clayton cut him off. "And if anyone else has something to say about Mrs. Jacobs or her children, they can say it to my face." The silence in the store grew heavier. Clayton Reeves, known for his coldness and isolation, was standing in the middle of Parker's grocery, defending a black widow and her 7 children. People would be talking about this for weeks. Olivia gathered her children closer, her face composed, but her eyes bright with unshed tears. Clayton paid for the groceries, and they loaded everything into the SUV in tense silence. The drive home was quieter than the trip into town. The children seemed subdued, processing what they'd witnessed. About halfway back, Olivia spoke softly. "You didn't have to do that, Mr. Reeves." "Yes, Mum, I did," Clayton replied, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "What they did wasn't right." Back at the ranch, they unloaded the groceries together. The children slowly regained their spirits, running off to play while Olivia organized the pantry. Clayton watched her work, struck by her resilience. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Olivia found Clayton on the back porch. She sat in the chair next to his, both of them looking out at the star-lit pastures. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for defending us, but for showing my children that good people will stand up for what's right." Clayton was quiet for a long moment. "Being around you and your children, it's made me think about things. About the kind of man I've become, and the kind of man I want to be." "And what kind of man is that?" Olivia asked softly. "Someone who doesn't just stand by when things are wrong. Someone who—" He paused, searching for words. "Someone who remembers there's more to life than just existing." Their eyes met in the darkness, and something passed between them. Understanding, respect, and perhaps something deeper that neither was ready to name. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the crickets and distant lowing of cattle, each lost in their own thoughts about how life can change when you least expect it. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, and for the first time in years, Clayton's ranch felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The Texas sun blazed high overhead as Clayton spoke with the bridge contractor near the washed-out crossing. While he discussed repair estimates and timeline options back at the ranch house, Olivia and her children were busy with their own plans. "Careful with those eggs, Marcus." Olivia guided her 10-year-old son as he cracked them into a bowl. "That's perfect, baby." The kitchen hummed with activity. 6-year-old twins Amy and Angela carefully arranged wildflowers they'd picked from the meadow into mason jars. 8-year-old David and 9-year-old Michael helped wash potatoes, while 12-year-old Sarah measured ingredients for cornbread. Even 4-year-old Jennifer had a job, standing on a chair to help stir the lemonade with focused determination. "Mama, do you think Mr. Clayton will like the surprise?" Amy asked, adjusting a yellow daisy in her arrangement. Olivia smiled, checking the chicken in the oven. "I think he will, sweetheart. He's been so kind to us these past days." The afternoon light streamed through the kitchen windows as they worked together. Olivia had taught her children that gratitude wasn't just about saying thank you. It was about showing it through actions. Today they would show Clayton their appreciation. "The table looks beautiful," Sarah announced proudly, stepping back to admire their work in the dining room. They had polished the old oak table until it gleamed, arranged the wildflower centerpieces, and set out the good dishes Clayton rarely used. The aroma of roasting chicken, herbs, and fresh-baked cornbread filled the house. Olivia checked her watch. Clayton would be returning soon. She heard the children giggling as they changed into their clean clothes, excited about their surprise. Just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the sound of Clayton's truck announced his return. The children scrambled to their positions, barely containing their excitement. Clayton's boots echoed on the porch. Steps. When he opened the front door, he stopped abruptly. The smell of home cooking wrapped around him like a warm embrace. Following the glow of candlelight, he made his way to the dining room and froze in the doorway. The scene before him was unlike anything he'd seen in his home for decades. The table was set beautifully, decorated with wildflowers that brought the outside beauty in. All 7 children stood beaming beside their chairs, dressed in their cleanest clothes. And there was Olivia, wearing a simple blue dress, her eyes warm with welcome. "What's all this?" Clayton asked, his voice rough with emotion. "We wanted to thank you," Olivia explained softly, "for everything." "Please sit down, Mr. Clayton," Sarah said formally, gesturing to the head of the table. Clayton slowly took his seat, still processing the transformation of his usually empty dining room. The children sat down too, their faces glowing in the candlelight. "Before we eat," Olivia said, "the children have something for you." One by one, the children presented Clayton with hand-drawn cards. Some showed pictures of horses, others had carefully written thank you notes. Jennifer's was a collection of colourful scribbles with a big heart in the middle. I have something for you all too," Clayton said, clearing his throat. He stood up and retrieved a bag he'd hidden in his office earlier that day. The children watched with wide eyes as he pulled out carefully wrapped packages. For David and Michael, there were toy horses, exact replicas of Clayton's favourite stallions. Sarah received a leather-bound book of horse stories. The twins got matching Western hats that made them squeal with delight. Marcus received a junior rancher's vest, and little Jennifer got a soft, plush pony. But it was the last gift that brought tears to Olivia's eyes. Clayton handed each child a warm jacket, clearly expensive but practical, perfect for the coming winter months. "Mr. Clayton!" The children cried out in unison, rushing to hug him. Clayton found himself surrounded by small arms and happy faces, something that would have terrified him just days ago. Now he felt his heart swell with unexpected joy. "Thank you, sir," Sarah said, clutching her book. "How did you know I love to read?" "I notice things," Clayton said softly, catching Olivia's eye across the room. The dinner that followed was filled with laughter and conversation. Clayton listened as each child shared their favorite part of living on the ranch. Jennifer loved the chickens. David and Michael were fascinated by the horses. The twins couldn't stop talking about the wildflowers, and Sarah expressed interest in learning about the business side of ranching. Outside in the gathering darkness, Brent Walker stood in the shadows of the barn, watching the scene through the dining room windows. His face twisted with anger as he saw Clayton, his boss, the man he'd been stealing from for months, laughing with Olivia and her children. The sight of them sharing a meal like family made his blood boil. In the barn behind him, the lights cast his tall shadow against the wall. His hands clenched into fists as he watched Clayton help Jennifer cut her chicken, saw him smile at something Olivia said. Everything Brent had carefully built over years of patient manipulation was threatening to crumble because of this widow and her children. Inside, unaware of the watching eyes, the family continued their celebration. Clayton found himself relaxing, drawn into the warmth and joy that Olivia and her children brought to his home. For the first time in years, his dining room felt alive, filled with the kind of happiness he'd forgotten could exist. "Would anyone like more cornbread?" Olivia asked, passing the basket around. "Yes, please," chorused several voices. Clayton watched as Olivia served her children, struck by the grace and love in her every movement. The candlelight caught the silver threads in her dark hair, and he found himself wondering how he'd ever thought his empty house was enough. Outside, Brent's silhouette moved against the barn lights as he turned away from the window, his mind already formulating plans for retaliation. But inside the warmth of the dining room, surrounded by children's laughter and the smell of home cooking, Clayton and Olivia shared a moment of perfect contentment, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Dawn broke over the ranch with the promise of another peaceful morning. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of dew-covered grass. But that serenity shattered when thick black smoke began billowing from the large wooden barn. Clayton first noticed it through his study window, dark clouds rising against the pale morning sky. His heart stopped for a moment before racing into action. He bolted from his chair, nearly knocking it over in his haste to get outside. At the same moment, Olivia was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she smelled the smoke. Her maternal instincts kicked in immediately. "Children!" she called out, her voice steady but urgent. "Everyone inside now!" But as she did a quick head count of the children rushing toward her, her blood ran cold. Amy and Anna, the 10-year-old twins, were missing. "Where are the twins?" she asked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "They went to see the new kittens in the barn," Sarah answered, her eyes wide with fear. Clayton was already running toward the barn, his boots pounding against the dirt. The smoke was getting thicker, and he could see flames licking up the wooden walls. Through the haze, he spotted two small figures near the barn entrance, coughing and disoriented. "Amy! Anna!" he shouted, sprinting faster. The twins were doubled over, choking on the thick smoke. Without hesitation, Clayton scooped up both girls, one under each arm, and ran back toward safety. Behind him, there was a terrible groaning sound as the barn's roof began to give way. The noise was deafening, cracking timber and the roar of flames. Clayton didn't slow down until he reached Olivia, who was running towards them with tears streaming down her face. Just as he set the girls down, the barn roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks shooting into the morning sky. "My babies," Olivia sobbed, gathering the twins into her arms. Both girls were coughing but conscious, their faces streaked with soot. "Are you hurt? Can you breathe?" Clayton stood watching them, his hands shaking with a mixture of fury and fear. The twins could have died if he'd been a few minutes later. He couldn't finish the thought. The sound of sirens cut through the crackling of flames. Sheriff Santos's patrol car came racing up the drive, followed by fire trucks. The sheriff jumped out, his experienced eyes taking in the scene. "Everyone all right?" he called out, jogging over to where they stood. Clayton nodded tersely. "The twins were near the barn, but we got them out in time." The sheriff's face darkened as he surveyed the burning structure. "This wasn't an accident," he said grimly. "Someone set this fire. Look at how it started in multiple places." Clayton's jaw clenched. He knew exactly who was responsible, but proving it would be another matter entirely. He glanced at Olivia, who was still holding the twins close, her other children clustered around her like frightened chicks. The fire department worked quickly to contain the blaze, but the barn was already a total loss. As the morning wore on, the smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of how close they'd come to tragedy. Later that afternoon, Olivia found Clayton in his study. Her face was pale but composed. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, "I need to speak with you." Clayton looked up, and something in her expression made his heart sink. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for us," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't risk my children's lives. Once the bridge is repaired, we'll need to leave." Clayton wanted to argue, wanted to promise he could keep them safe, but the words wouldn't come. How could he make such a promise when he couldn't even protect his own barn? He simply nodded, the weight of failure heavy on his shoulders. That evening, dinner was a quiet affair. The usual chatter and laughter were replaced by the clinking of silverware against plates. Even little Jennifer seemed to sense the somber mood, picking at her food instead of telling her usual stories about the chickens. Clayton watched as Olivia gently encouraged each child to eat, her own food barely touched. The twins still had slight coughs, reminding everyone of the morning's near disaster. Sarah kept glancing at Clayton with worried eyes, while David and Michael pushed their peas around their plates listlessly. After dinner, Clayton stood in the hallway outside the guest rooms, watching as Olivia moved from room to room. She was pulling out small bags, carefully, folding clothes and packing away the few possessions they'd brought with them. Each item she packed seemed to drive home the reality that they would soon be gone. Through an open door, he could see Jennifer clutching her new plush pony, refusing to let Olivia pack it away. "Can't we stay, Mama?" he heard the little girl ask. "Mr. Clayton keeps us safe." "Hush now, baby," Olivia replied softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes being safe means making hard choices." Clayton turned away, unable to watch any more. He walked to his study and sat heavily in his chair, staring out at the smouldering remains of the barn. The ranch had never felt more empty, and they hadn't even left yet. In the quiet of the evening, the only sounds were the gentle rustling of clothes being folded, and the soft murmur of Olivia's voice as she comforted her children. Each sound seemed to echo through the house like a countdown to their departure, marking the moments until Clayton's brief glimpse of family would fade away like smoke in the morning air. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch, highlighting the blackened skeleton of the barn against the Texas sky. Clayton stood at his kitchen window, coffee untouched in his hand, watching smoke still rising faintly from the ruins. His jaw clenched as he thought about how close they'd come to tragedy. Inside the house, he could hear the muffled sounds of Olivia comforting her children. The twins were still coughing occasionally, and the younger ones remained unusually quiet, subdued by yesterday's frightening events. Clayton's heart ached knowing their fear, but it also strengthened his resolve. He set down his coffee cup with determination. It was time to end this. He'd spent the early hours of dawn planning his next moves, and now he needed to act. Grabbing his hat and keys, he headed for the door. "Mr. Reeves." Olivia's soft voice stopped him. She stood in the hallway, worry etched on her face. "Please be careful." Clayton nodded, touched by her concern. "Keep everyone inside today," he said firmly. "Lock the doors." The morning air was crisp as Clayton drove his truck around to the back of the property, where Brent kept his personal storage shed. The foreman had always been protective of this space, claiming it held family heirlooms and personal items. Now Clayton knew better. Using a bolt cutter, he made quick work of the padlock. The door creaked open, revealing stacks of feed bags pushed against the walls. Clayton's eyes narrowed as he examined them. They matched exactly with shipments that had supposedly never arrived. In a filing cabinet, he found delivery receipts with altered numbers, along with detailed records of cattle sold off books to buyers in neighboring counties. Clayton's hands shook with anger as he photographed everything with his phone. The evidence was overwhelming. Months, perhaps years of systematic theft laid bare before him. He gathered key documents into a folder, his movements precise and controlled despite his fury. Back at the house, he called Sheriff Santos. "I need you out here," he said quietly. "I've got proof of who's behind everything." The sheriff arrived within 30 minutes, parking discreetly behind the house. Clayton showed him the evidence, explaining how the numbers lined up with the missing cattle and suspicious feed deliveries. "This is more than enough for an arrest," Santos confirmed, examining the documents. "How do you want to handle this?" Clayton's expression hardened. "Publicly. The whole ranch needs to see this." They drove to the main work area, where the ranch hands were gathering for their morning assignments. Brent stood near the temporary corral, giving instructions as if nothing was wrong. Clayton felt a surge of disgust at the man's audacity. "Brent!" Clayton's voice carried across the yard. The other workers turned to watch as Clayton strode forward, the sheriff following close behind. Brent's face showed a flicker of uncertainty before settling into its usual mask of competence. "Something wrong, boss?" Clayton held up the folder. "Want to explain these? Or should I tell everyone how you've been stealing from this ranch for years?" The other ranch hands gathered closer, murmuring among themselves. Brent's face reddened. "Don't know what you're talking about," he spat. "The altered feed receipts? The cattle you've been selling on the side?" Clayton's voice was cold. "Or maybe you'd like to explain the barn fire?" Brent's eyes darted to the sheriff, then back to Clayton. Something dangerous flashed across his face. "You think you're so much better than everyone," he snarled. "Living in your big house, looking down on us all, then you bring in that woman and her brats." He didn't finish. With surprising speed, Brent lunged at Clayton, swinging a heavy fist. But Clayton was ready. He stepped aside and caught Brent's arm, using the man's own momentum to throw him off balance. They grappled briefly before Clayton pinned him face down in the dirt. Sheriff Santos moved in quickly with handcuffs. "That's assault on top of everything else," he said grimly. "You're done, Brent." From the corner of his eye, Clayton caught movement at the house. Olivia stood on the porch, one hand pressed to her mouth as she watched the scene unfold. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and he saw understanding dawn in her expression. Understanding of why he'd had to confront this publicly, why he'd needed to end the threat to his ranch, and, more importantly, to her family. The sheriff led Brent to his patrol car while Clayton addressed the stunned ranch hands. He explained the situation briefly, assuring them the ranch would continue operating as normal. They nodded respectfully, many looking relieved to see the true source of recent troubles revealed. As the morning wore on, Clayton handled the necessary arrangements, filing official charges, appointing a temporary foreman, and beginning to assess the full scope of Brent's theft. But his thoughts kept returning to Olivia and the children, safely inside the house. Late that afternoon, he stood at his office window, watching the road crew in the distance. They were making final repairs to the bridge. Soon it would be passable again, and Olivia would leave with her children, taking with her the warmth and life they'd brought to his home. He could see her through the kitchen window, gathering her children for their evening meal. Even now, after everything that had happened, she maintained her quiet dignity and strength. Clayton's chest tightened as he watched them, knowing these moments were numbered. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a beautiful ending to an ugly day. Clayton remained at his window, unable to look away from the family that had changed everything, the family he was about to lose. The morning dawned with a heavy silence. Golden light crept across the ranch, painting long shadows across the dew-covered grass. Clayton stood at his bedroom window, watching the sun rise with a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain away. Down in the bunkhouse, Olivia woke her children early. "Time to get ready, little ones," she whispered, her voice gentle but firm. The children stirred slowly, some rubbing sleep from their eyes, while others immediately understood the significance of the day. "Do we have to go, Mama?" her youngest daughter asked, clutching her small blanket. Olivia smoothed the child's hair, fighting back the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Yes, baby. The bridge is fixed now. We need to let Mr. Reeves have his home back." The children moved quietly, packing their few belongings into worn bags. Olivia had already cleaned the bunkhouse thoroughly, leaving it better than they'd found it. She gathered their meager possessions, making sure nothing was left behind. Clayton watched from his office window as they emerged from the bunkhouse, a small parade of determined figures in the early morning light. His hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to run down and stop them, to beg them to stay, to tell Olivia that his home had never felt more alive than during these past days. But he remained still, his jaw tight with unspoken words. Olivia led her children to the main house, where Clayton met them on the porch. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of hay and distant rain. She stood before him, her dignity intact despite everything they'd been through. "Mr. Reeves," she began, her voice wavering slightly, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for us. Your generosity." She paused, gathering herself. "Your bravery in protecting us. We'll never forget it." Tears shone in her eyes, catching the early morning light. Clayton stood stiffly, his own emotions threatening to break through his carefully maintained control. The children gathered around their mother, some crying quietly, others trying to be brave. "You don't have to," Clayton started, but stopped himself. He knew she'd made up her mind. Her children's safety came first, as it should. The oldest boy, usually so quiet, stepped forward and handed Clayton a small package wrapped in newspaper. "We made you breakfast," he said softly, "so you won't forget us." Clayton took the package, his hands trembling slightly. "I could never forget you," he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. One by one, the children hugged him, quick, fierce embraces that threatened to shatter his composure. Olivia watched, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. When the last child stepped back, she met Clayton's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing us there are still good men in this world." Clayton couldn't speak. He nodded once, sharply, his throat too tight for words. He watched as Olivia gathered her children, leading them toward the waiting church van that had come to collect them. The morning sun cast their shadows long across the ground, like pieces of himself being pulled away. After they left, Clayton stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the empty driveway. The ranch felt different now, hollow, as if all the warmth had been drained from it. He finally turned and went inside, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The dining room stopped him in his tracks. Memories of laughter, prayers, and shared meals hit him like physical blows. Without thinking, he began to clean, straightening chairs, wiping down the table, trying to keep his hands busy to distract from the ache in his chest. He found crumbs under the chair where the youngest always sat, a crayon mark on the table edge where another had colored too enthusiastically. Each discovery was like a knife to his heart. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary of solitude now felt like a tomb of lost possibilities. In town, Olivia and her children arrived at the church shelter. The building was clean but sparse, nothing like the warm comfort they'd known at the ranch. The children huddled close to their mother, quiet and subdued. "It's only temporary," Olivia assured them, though her heart ached at the step backward they were taking. "We'll find something better soon." Back at the ranch, Clayton sat heavily in his office chair. On his desk lay the thank you card the children had made him, covered in wobbly drawings of horses, hearts, and smiling stick figures. Their names were signed in different colors, some backwards, all precious. He traced the childish drawings with his finger, remembering how proud they'd been to give it to him. The card captured everything he'd gained and lost in these past days. Family, warmth, purpose beyond mere success. The afternoon sun slanted through his office windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Clayton sat alone in his large, empty house, the thank you card in his hands, finally understanding that what he'd lost wasn't just the presence of Olivia and her children. He'd lost the chance at the life he'd never known he wanted, a life filled with love, laughter, and the beautiful chaos of family. The silence pressed in around him, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second marked the growing distance between him and the family that had brought his home to life. The mansion that had once been his refuge now felt like nothing more than an empty shell, echoing with memories of joy he feared he'd never know again. 2 days passed like an eternity for Clayton Reeves. Each hour in his empty house reminded him of what he'd lost. The sound of children's laughter echoed only in his memory now, haunting the halls that had briefly known such joy. On the morning of the second day, Clayton sat in his office, staring at a thick folder of evidence. Sheriff Santos had helped him compile everything: bank records, altered receipts, photographs, and signed statements from ranch hands who'd witnessed Brent's misdeeds. The evidence was clear. Brent Walker had acted alone in his theft and sabotage. But it wasn't the evidence that made Clayton's hands shake as he closed the folder. It was the realization that he'd let his own fear drive away the best thing that had ever happened to him. He stood abruptly, grabbed his keys, and headed for his truck. The drive into town seemed longer than usual, each mile giving him time to rehearse what he needed to say. The church shelter sat on a quiet street, its white steeple reaching toward the clear Texas sky. It was Sunday morning. Through the open windows, Clayton could hear the congregation singing hymns. He hesitated at the entrance, folder clutched in his hands, then squared his shoulders and walked in. The singing stopped as he entered. Dozens of faces turned to stare at him, some curious, some suspicious. Near the front, Olivia sat with her children, all dressed in their Sunday best. The youngest spotted him first and let out a delighted squeal before Olivia could quiet her. "I apologize for interrupting," Clayton said, his voice carrying in the hushed sanctuary. "But I need to say something important." The pastor, a kind-faced man in his 60s, nodded for Clayton to continue. Clayton walked to the front, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He turned to face the congregation, but found himself looking directly at Olivia. "I have evidence here." He held up the folder. "That proves Brent Walker acted alone in his crimes, but that's not why I'm here." He took a deep breath. "I'm here because I made a mistake." Olivia's eyes widened slightly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Not the mistake you might think," Clayton continued. "My mistake wasn't letting you stay at my ranch. My mistake was letting fear push you away." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "I've spent my whole life building walls, keeping people at a distance. Then you and your children came along and showed me what I was missing." The children sat perfectly still, hanging on his every word. The oldest boy had tears in his eyes. "You brought light into my home," Clayton said, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed me what it means to have faith, not just in God, but in people, in family." He turned to address the whole congregation. "I know what some people in this town think. I've heard the whispers and the judgment, but I'm standing here to tell you that Olivia Jacobs and her children are the best thing that ever happened to me." He turned back to Olivia, who was openly crying now. "I don't want a temporary arrangement. I don't want a business deal or a convenient solution. I want a real family. I want laughter in my house again. I want prayer at my table and children's drawings on my walls." The middle twins couldn't contain themselves any longer. They broke away from their mother and ran to Clayton, wrapping their arms around his legs. One by one, the other children followed, until Clayton was surrounded by their embrace. "I promise you safety," he said to Olivia over their heads. "I promise you honesty and respect. I promise your children will always have a home where they're protected and cherished." He swallowed hard. "I promise to be the man you believed I could be." The youngest tugged at his sleeve until he bent down. She whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Does this mean we can come home?" A ripple of gentle laughter went through the congregation. Clayton looked at Olivia, his heart in his eyes. "That's what I'm asking," he said softly. "Will you come home? Not as guests, but as family? Olivia stood slowly, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. You mean that? She asked, about being family. Every word. Clayton replied firmly. She looked at her children, clustered around Clayton like they belonged there. Then she looked at the congregation, her church family who had supported her through so much. To her surprise, she saw encouraging smiles and nodding heads. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, we'll come home. The children cheered, hugging Clayton tighter. Someone in the congregation started clapping, and soon the whole church joined in. The pastor stepped forward, beaming, as the applause filled the sanctuary. Well, the pastor said warmly, I believe we're witnessing something beautiful here today, a testament to God's grace and the power of redemption. The applause grew louder, punctuated by happy exclamations and words of blessing. Olivia made her way through the children to stand before Clayton. He reached out and took her hand, and in that simple gesture was a promise of tomorrow. The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting them all in warm, bright colors. In that moment, surrounded by joy and acceptance, Clayton finally understood what it meant to be truly rich. It wasn't about the cattle or the land or the money in the bank. It was about the family gathering around him, the love shining in Olivia's eyes, and the knowledge that his house would soon be a home again. The early morning sun painted golden streaks across the Texas sky as Clayton supervised the last of the moving boxes being carried into the renovated bunkhouse. Over the past week, he had thrown himself into transforming the space, determined to create a home worthy of his new family. Careful with that one, Olivia called out as two ranch hands carried in a box marked fragile in her neat handwriting. It has the children's special memories inside. The bunkhouse was unrecognizable from its former state. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new windows let in streams of natural light, and the smell of sawdust still lingered from the custom-built bunk beds. Clayton had insisted on doing much of the work himself, spending long hours installing study tables, hanging cheerful curtains, and carefully mounting shelves for books and toys. 7-year-old Sarah squealed with delight as she discovered the pink and purple butterfly decals Clayton had secretly added to the girls' room. Mama, look, it's just like in my drawings. Olivia smiled, touching Clayton's arm gently. You remembered. Every detail, he replied softly, watching as the other children explored their new spaces. The boys' room featured model airplanes hanging from the ceiling and a reading nook with comfortable bean bags. The shared study area had individual desks for homework, with plenty of storage for school supplies. Throughout the morning, the children helped unpack, turning the space into their own. 10-year-old Marcus carefully arranged his books on his shelf, while the twins, both 8 years old, worked together to make their beds with new, cowboy-themed quilts. 12-year-old Jennifer, the oldest, helped her younger siblings organize their clothes and toys. By early afternoon, the moving was complete. Clayton stood in the doorway, taking in the scene. Colorful artwork already decorated the walls, backpacks hung on personalized hooks, and family photos smiled from every surface. The sterile bunkhouse had become a vibrant family home. It's time to get ready, Olivia reminded everyone, glancing at the clock. The ceremony starts in 2 hours. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as guests began gathering at the rebuilt bridge. Clayton had insisted on this location for their wedding, seeing deep meaning in its symbolism. The structure that once kept them apart would now join them together. The bridge had been decorated with wild flowers and white ribbons, transforming the practical crossing into something magical. Wooden chairs lined both sides, filled with ranch hands and their families, along with the more accepting members of the community who had come to support them. Clayton stood at the center of the bridge, His usually stern face softened with emotion as he watched Olivia approach. She wore a simple white dress that caught the breeze, her dark skin glowing in the late afternoon light. The children preceded her, the girls scattering flower petals while the boys carried small rings on cushions. The pastor from their church stood ready to perform the ceremony, his kind face beaming at the gathering. "We are here today," he began, "to celebrate not just the union of two people, but the binding together of a family." Olivia and Clayton exchanged vows that spoke not only of their love for each other, but their commitment to all 7 children. There were tears and laughter as they promised to build a life together, to face whatever challenges might come with unity and faith. "With this ring," Clayton said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "I promise to be not just a husband, but a father, to protect and cherish all of you every day of my life." After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the ranch house. The dining room and kitchen overflowed with people, laughter, and the aromas of a feast prepared by many helping hands. Tables groaned under the weight of traditional Texas barbecue, alongside dishes Olivia had taught the ranch cook to make. Music filled the air as someone brought out a guitar, and soon the sound of singing joined the joyful atmosphere. The children danced and played, their happiness infectious. Even the most hesitant guests found themselves tapping their feet and smiling. Before the meal, Olivia asked everyone to join hands for prayer. Clayton looked around the circle of faces, his new family, his loyal workers, their neighbors, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. The prayer was one of thanksgiving, acknowledging the mysterious ways that God could turn challenges into blessings. As evening settled over the ranch, the celebration continued with cake and stories. People shared memories of the past weeks, now able to laugh about the misunderstandings and tensions that had led to this moment. The children proudly showed off their new home to visitors, excited to point out every special touch their new father had added. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Clayton gathered all 7 children in the living room for their first official bedtime story as a family. They curled up on couches and sprawled on the floor, eager faces turned toward him as he opened a well-worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. Olivia leaned against the doorway, watching as Clayton did different voices for each character, drawing giggles from the younger ones and appreciative smiles from the older children. His natural grace with them made her heart swell with love and certainty about their decision. As Clayton finished the story, he looked around at the sleepy faces of his children now in every way that mattered, and then at Olivia, who returned his gaze with eyes full of love. The warm, bustling house bore no resemblance to the cold, empty mansion it had been just weeks ago. He thought about the temporary wife he had originally ordered through the agency, realizing now how shallow and misguided that plan had been. Instead, life had brought him something far more precious. Permanent family, complete with the chaos, love, and joy he never knew he needed. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the halls. Prayer and music still lingered in the air, and Clayton knew with absolute certainty that his house had finally become a home. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.